of the co-organisers here at Knots Test. Very pleased to see you. We are a little testing meetup here in Nottingham in the East Midlands of the UK. It's good to see some international visitors. I've seen Marcus here. I don't know where Zabul is. Where about to you, Zabul?
I work out of the London office.
London office, okay. All the way down south. That's almost like a foreign land to us up in the Midlands. So I can't.
Yeah.
So good to see you all. I'll hand over to. Well, I don't have to tell you where the toilets are. You probably know where they are. Marcus is outside. Looking for Marcus. Do mute yourself, and Amit will start presenting. Thank you very much.
Okay, guys, thank you for coming today. Let me quickly share the screen. So yeah, let me know if all of you can see the screen clearly or not.
Yeah, all good.
All good? Okay, perfect. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. The talk is about Taiko, reliable browser automation, created by ThoughtWorks and contributors because it's an open source tool. Um, so let's. So first of all, I want to thank Knots Test for inviting me to present this talk. So thank you, Dave. Thank you, Christian. Um, it's a pleasure. And I also want to thank Team Taiko because while testing this tool, I got a lot of help from the team, and because it's an open source community, I just wanted to wish them luck with this tool. So, what is Taiko? I mean, I just want to give a brief introduction before we delve into it detail. So, it's just a simple Node library, Node.js library, with a clear and concise API to automate Chromium browsers. So in short, that's what it is. Um, about me, I've worked for about 13 years in software testing, tested web, mobile, desktop applications, and worked in large enterprises and startups. Um so yeah, so Taiko actually focuses on end-to-end browser test. And before we talk about Taiko, we need to understand what is an end-to-end browser test. So Martin Fowler, the great Martin Fowler, has said that user journey tests are a form of business-facing test designed to simulate a typical user's journey through the system. So whenever you are doing an end-to-end test, it's not just testing the system, but you're also actually testing the backend while testing the front end through the user journey. So when you test that, you're actually testing a lot of components. And such a test will typically cover a user's entire interaction with the system. So that includes other third-party applications, plugins, backend, middleware, all those systems. Um, and what are the normally the challenges with the end-to-end browser test? So it takes a lot of time to execute. It's not part of the development cycle because most of the development team, what they do is they try to automate the unit test, the API testing, and the browser tests in the end, where the user is actually going to use a website. Uh, are not actually part of the development life cycle, and it's or normally given to testers to execute and take care of. The other thing is flakiness. So a lot of time the backend code keeps changing, so the front end keeps breaking whenever you want to write your test. So it results in a lot of flakiness, and then again it's tough to read or modify. So if a simple business user or even a tester wants to start with automating something, then it becomes difficult. So tools like I think Dave, you mentioned someone mentioned Cypress, Puppeteer, Selenium, all these things. So for a simple, I mean, for a manual tester to come and start automating, I think it's a difficult start. And one of the reasons I picked up Taiko was because of that. End-to-end browser test. So the goal normally is to simulate a real user scenario from start to finish, and that's the end goal of a browser test. So let's start with the introduction. Again, as I've said, it's free and open source browser automation tool built by ThoughtWorks. And ThoughtWorks have got a good history with open source tools. They actually created Selenium in 2004. Um, that's the Selenium IDE, and then the Selenium WebDriver, and then the WebDriver got adopted as a W3C standard. So they have a rich open source history with automation tools. Now the word Taiko. So Taiko has been inspired by a tool called Puppeteer. Um, So puppet for short, and taiko is a Japanese word for barrel-shaped drums used during puppet shows in Japan. So that's the inspiration. And Zabil here in the group told me about it, and it was kind of interesting how the tool got its origin. Um, my first experience of Taiko was again as part of a meetup. So I'm really thankful for meetups like these because it helps us in the testing community to come up and learn about new tools and technologies and processes. My experience with Taiko was as part of a meetup organized at ThoughtWorks, and the talk was given by Scott Davis. So Taiko has actually also been featured on Tech Radar, which is ThoughtWorks' own publish. They publish it every, I think, 6 months, and they talk about what could be the future trend. And one of the trends that they predicted was Taiko being adopted. Um, so as I said, it was inspired by Puppeteer. Puppeteer has been a tool which is a lot of people might be already familiar, a tool from Google, and there is another tool in the market which got inspired from Puppeteer, which is from by Microsoft called Playwright. And the other inspiration was Helium, which is a Python library. And I'll let the GIF play so you'll understand. So we are starting Chrome. The browser opens and it goes to a URL. Then you write the username into a particular field. In this case, it's a text box. And then you write password into the field. Then you click the button. So it was as simple as that. And that's basically the inspiration for Taiko. And this is what Taiko does. It's the GIF is an old version using Taiko. It's currently I think 1.0.16. So it keeps on getting updated. But this is what's happening. It opens a browser, goes to a URL, writes some text, presses the enter key, clicks a link, and closes the browser. So yes, because it's a Node.js library, it will run anywhere Node.js runs. As simple as that. So it means you can run it on Mac, Docker containers, Android application, Android. So anywhere you can run Node.js, you can run Taiko basically. And it uses the Chrome DevTools protocol, so it doesn't follow the WebDriver standard. So it uses the Chrome DevTools protocol, which is built in the browser. And because it uses Chromium by default, it's easier to talk using this protocol. And it has custom plugins. So because it's an open source tool, a lot of people have actually, there are some which the core team has written, and then there are some which the open source team have written. So these are plugins, and there are more plugins that you can find on npm.js. One of the examples, I've taken a GIF again from the website. So this is a Taiko on Android. So you can see there is an emulator running of an Android device. They're using Jest for the test runner. And what it will try to do is it will try to open the Chromium browser, and then it will try to navigate to a URL and then perform some actions on the browser inside Android. So it's pretty cool that way. So you went to github.com. So now you'll type the username, email address, password. So yeah, I mean you can see what it can do. Um, so what are its main features? So it can write test scripts by looking at a web page without inspecting its source code. So you don't have to worry about CSS selectors or XPath selectors. A lot of times when testers have to write automation code for automating a particular front-end website, you have to think about the selectors for a particular web element and then perform an action on it. So with smart selectors, I will show you in the demo how you can actually locate an element without actually worrying about the backend code. And in some cases, you can even I mean, even if you don't have an HTML code or a CSS selector like you have a React website or Angular website, you can still interact with the elements, which is quite cool. Then you don't have to define implicit the waits by default. So Taiko will wait for the element to load before you can interact with it. So there is a default timeout, but in case the element doesn't load during, um, I mean, till the default timeout runs out, then you can actually define your own timeout as well. Then it has an interactive recorder. I think this is one of the key features that I love about Taiko is it's got a REPL mode. And what you can do is while you're writing the code, you can actually see what's happening in the browser. So you don't have to run the entire code, and I will show you in the demo what it means. And it's one of the most useful features of Taiko, which I really love. And then the request and response stubbing. So you can actually intercept request and redirect them to different locations, different websites. So in the demo, maybe I'll show you that as well. Some of the acronyms that we used for people who are not familiar with what is an XHR or REPL. So this is just the definitions. I'll give a few seconds and then I'll change. Yeah. Okay, so why JavaScript? So Taiko, as I mentioned, it's a Node.js, so it by default it's JavaScript. Uh, and why not say Java, C Sharp, or Python? Because that's predominantly some of the programming languages which a lot of testers are familiar with. So I also did some research as to why JavaScript, and there is a very good article about JavaScript, the future of end-to-end testing. So the predominant reason is Selenium WebDriver is now becoming a W3C standard, and everyone has been using Java, Python, Ruby, and C Sharp for automating inside the browser, and that's the current state. Uh, but if you go to JavaScript, the advantages or the benefits that you get is that it's already in the browser. So most of the browsers will have a console, and you can actually, using the console, you can interact with different elements. So JavaScript is already there. So it's easier to start using JavaScript to interact with web elements. Um, then there are different wrappers. So Electron is one of the wrappers through which you can create a desktop application for a web application. So it means you can interact with that as well because it's using JavaScript. And then by default, because it uses Chrome DevTools, I mean, because you have Chrome DevTools protocol now and JavaScript, it means any Chromium based browser you can use. So that includes Edge, Opera, Brave, Vivaldi, and Firefox is the nightly version now has support for Chromium. So it's still in nascent stages, and there are still some bugs, but Firefox is moving in that direction. So apart from Safari, you can cover at least 90% of use cases in terms of browser usage. So if suppose you want to start using Taiko, what would an ideal test frame look like? So you can use JavaScript or TypeScript, so which is good. Then you will have test runner like Gauge, Mocha, Jest. Gauge is another test runner from ThoughtWorks. So instead of using say the BDD syntax, you'll use Markdown syntax, which is much more easier to use because you don't have to write your spec file in given when then. You can write your spec file in a Markdown syntax like I go to a particular URL, I log in, and then I perform an action, I log out, I close the browser. So in that sequence, if you write a test, it's much more easier to understand for a product owner, for a tester, or for anyone who's reading the code. So it uses the Node.js libraries, Taiko, plus because you are using Node.js, it means you have access to all the other libraries. So Taiko can also work with other Node.js libraries, which is pretty cool. I have tried to use other Node.js libraries for different purposes, and I'll show you in the demo as well how I've used it. Protocol I mentioned, it uses Chrome DevTools protocol. And then these are the browsers: Chromium, Chrome, Edge, Opera, Brave, Vivaldi. And you can work on Windows, you can work on Mac OS because it supports Node.js. You can work on Linux, you can work using Jenkins. I've tried to run Taiko scripts inside a Docker container. You can run it on Raspberry Pi, and you can also run it on Android. But remember, it's a browser application automation tool, so you'll have to run it inside a browser. And any front end JavaScript framework like Angular, Vue, or React, you can work with it. So it's pretty capable in terms of user features. Now, when it comes to comparison with other automation tools in the market, let's have a look. So currently, I mean, you have Selenium, you have WebDriver IO, you have Test Cafe, Cypress, Puppeteer, Taiko, and there are various other tools. But Taiko, or to say ThoughtWorks, did a comparison, and these are their results. So Selenium actually wins in cross-browser support and number of languages to author test. And the test framework integration is really good. If you look at Cypress, Cypress wins again in test failure analysis. When we look at Puppeteer, Puppeteer trumps all the browsers all the tools in terms of performance and also with framework integration. Taiko, it wins in maintenance, reliability of weight mechanisms, and then overall test framework integration. And it's slowly catching up in performance with Puppeteer. It's not far behind Puppeteer now. And it's the second fastest tool after Puppeteer based on the comparisons which the ThoughtWorks team have done. And so, yeah, I mean, there were some of the tools that was mentioned, but these are all the tools that are the competition for Taiko: Selenium, WebDriver, Cypress, Puppeteer. This one is Codecept. Then you have Test Cafe, Nightwatch. This is Backstop. This is a Protractor. You have Playwright, and you also have Test Project. So there's so many tools now that it's actually uh, difficult for a tester to select which tool to start automating with. So I think if you are a manual tester, from my experience, I would say start with the simplest tool to use, because then you will get your automation concepts clear. And then no matter what tool you use, at least you're clear with how to identify elements, how to interact with different elements, and then you can work with any tool. So after learning Taiko, I did create a script with Puppeteer and Playwright, so, and even Selenium. So it's easy for me to understand how the different elements, how the different features of an automation tool works. Now the limitations, I think I've already spoken about it. So C Sharp, Java, Python, Ruby are not supported. So if you want to use any of those programming languages, unfortunately you can't. I've kept Firefox here as in browsers not supported, but nightly version, currently there is support, there is some testing going on, but it's of course not the stable, so I've still kept it as not supported here. And of course Internet Explorer and Safari are not supported. Platforms, so I mentioned Android, but I didn't mention iOS. So iOS is actually currently not supported. So let's go to the demo. So let me minimize this. um, yeah, okay, let me actually start my terminal. And let me start my terminal here. Okay. And let me say Taiko. So I've already installed Taiko. I can quickly show you how to install. So you just run npm install -g Taiko, and it will install Taiko globally. So it's as simple as that. And if you want a specific version, just tell the specific version and it will install the specific version for you. So that's the most simplest command to run Taiko. So coming back to the API itself. So let's see. So I've now come to Taiko, and as you can see, I am in a REPL mode. And I can see that the current version that I'm using is 1.0.16, and the browser that I'm using is Microsoft Edge. So as I mentioned, because it's Chromium based, I can use any of the Chromium based browsers, and for this particular demo I'm using Microsoft Edge, not Chromium. So if I want to open a browser, I'll say open browser, and it opened Edge for me. So, and let's say I want to go to, by default, whenever everyone starts automating, they go to google.com. So we say, okay, go to google.com. So it passed. Write, say, I'm not saying what where to write. I'm just saying write, say, notes test. Let's see what it does. So it's written notes test. Wow, good. So let me press enter. A user normally would press enter. Okay, so it pressed the enter key, and we have the search results. Now, if I want the code, see the JavaScript code. So I say .code, and it gives me the JavaScript code. So here I used open browser, go to write, press, and close browser. So all the APIs calls, it's captured only for the pass, and then it says, okay, require Taiko, and then it opens an asynchronous function with try catch block, and then you have await, and then you write the next steps. If there is an error, it'll display the error. In the end, it'll close the browser. So this code has now been there, and you can just copy, paste it in a file. So my this is already open. So if I paste it here, sorry, copy here. So I have control plus. Yeah, okay. So I've pasted this code, and if I now save it as a google.js, so I'll select all files. So it selected this, and if I want to now execute this code, what I'll do is I will say Taiko, so Taiko, and then I will say google.js. So this is PowerShell, so, and then I press enter, and because I have not told it, by default it will run in headless mode, so it doesn't open the browser, but it's showing me what it's doing. So it opened the browser, it navigated through the URL, it wrote notes test, it pressed the enter key, the browser closed. So all the functions worked perfectly fine, and I got the code, I executed certain things, and voila. Now, so let's go back to Taiko. Now I want to go to a different URL. Say I go to todomvc.com. Okay, sorry, I have to give quotes. I'll tell you why. So there are a lot of elements here. So I'll just say click. I want it to click this particular element. I'm not saying what it is, where it is, or what's the X path. I'll just say JavaScript. Let's see what it does. So it's click JavaScript, and you could see what happened. I wanted to click AngularJS now. So let's say click AngularJS. I'm not telling it where it is, and yeah. So let's see what happens. I'm not also telling this R element or anything, and I'm not telling where it is. Click AngularJS. It clicked AngularJS. Now I want to write something here. So let's say write test. So it's not written because it's not able to identify this element. So let's try something else. So this is a text element. So we'll wait. So yeah, it searched the whole page. It couldn't find the element where to write. So I'll say write test below text, and I'll say this text to do's. Let's see if it's able to do that. to-dos. So what I'm saying is write test into text box below this, below text to do. So how many brackets? So 1 2 3 4 5 3 5. Wow. So I've actually, in simple English, I've written test in a text box which is below this particular text, and I have not used any XPath, CSS, selectors or anything. But if you want to look at the page source, so this is the page source, and if I want to inspect the particular element, so this element is identified by a placeholder what needs to be done. I haven't mentioned any of it. I've just said write test into text box below this. Simple, simple as that. Now let's say press enter. Press the enter key, but because this was not in focus, so let's say this is there and press enter. Okay, so it's added. Now click active, clicked active. So I want to click this checkbox next to test, so I will say click checkbox 2. So this checkbox is left of test, so 2 left of test. And how many? So there are 3 brackets I've closed. It's clicked. Now let's click on completed. So I can see that the task is completed. Now I click on clear completed and this. Now I say dot code and I'll say angular dot js. Okay, and I exit. I say angular and I can see this code. So we went to do mvc.com, JavaScript, AngularJS. This is this, and this is the code that I've written. Now I'll show you something. So okay. So I was not able to copy. Right click, copy. So instead of Google, I'll just copy the base code here, and I will remove this enter, open browser, and instead of saying to do mvc.com, click AngularJS. I will, sorry, I have to open the browser. It's F11. Okay, so if I go to todomvc.com, so they have Angular and I'll say view.js. So view.js, and I will say headless false. I'll save this and I'll run it. Now let's see what happens. I have not modified the script. I've just modified the backend, because what this website does is it modifies, sorry, the front end. So let's see what happens. So it open Edge, goes to todomvc.com, clicks on JavaScript, clicks on view.js, clicks test, enters active, clicks the checkbox completed, clear completed, closes the browser. Same script, the elements and everything might have changed because the front end had changed, but the script was able to handle it. And similarly, if I say now, instead of Angular, I say click React, and execute the same script. And this is a good way to test your automation tool, because if the front end framework is changing constantly, do you have to actually write a lot of code to maintain it? Write a lot of code for your test to maintain. And as you can see, even though I've changed the URL, the test script still works without any issues. And I have not used any CSS selector. It's simple, plain English text. So yeah, there you go. And let me try to run it inside a Docker container. So I'll start Docker. So I'll wait for Docker to start. Go to my terminal. Okay, it's starting. Wait for it. I'll run the command. So I'll have to maybe run it in administrator mode. So terminal, run as admin, and yeah. So Docker build, I'll start writing the code. Build -t. So I'll give a name for the Docker container. I'll say Taiko 1. But I'll have to go to the location of the Docker file. So let me actually just go to the location of the Docker file. So I'll change the directory to OneDrive, Taiko scripts, and then yeah. And if I do ls, I can see that there is a Docker file here. Perfect. So now I'll run the command docker. Let me clear the screen. Maximize docker build -t Taiko 1, and then I'll say dot. So perfect. So it picked up my code. It's now building a Docker container. Sorry, Docker image, not a container. Let me quickly show you the Docker file. So for people, yeah. So I'm saying build an image from this node, and I'm using a multi-stage build. So I'm using a root user, then I install all the dependencies for Chromium, and then I create a user test, so I don't have to execute the code using root privileges. So it's a good standard to always execute your code using test. Sorry, not a non-root user. And then I install Taiko. I mention a particular version of Taiko that I install. I set the home directory, and then I change the ownership of the home directory. And then this is my default image. And from that, I create another image where I say the test is, the user is test, and then I change all the I copy all the local files into the working directory, so whatever script you want, and then I issue a command. So let's look. So it's installing the dependencies. I will I'll go through the presentation for now. So I mean, just want to wrap it up to open it for the audience for questions. So it's a Node.js library, uses Chrome DevTools protocol, smart selectors, handling waits. So as you noticed, I didn't tell the script or the tool to wait for a particular element to load. It implicitly did it. And then it comes with an interactive REPL, so you can actually see what's if you type a particular code, what happens inside a browser, which is, I think, quite intuitive. It's completely open source, and these are all the links. I've already shared it with Dave, so I think once the meetup is over, he can maybe share all the links. And I've created a lot of scripts which I've hosted on GitHub, so I can share that as well. Presentation is also available in GitHub if you like this presentation and want to reuse it. And yeah, so if you want to connect with me, that's my email, LinkedIn, GitHub. and yeah, I open it to questions, and let's have a look at the Docker container. So because it's building from scratch, it's installing all the libraries and the dependencies, and as you can see, it's taking a bit of time. Meanwhile, I mean, if no one has any questions, I can also show what are the different scripts I've created. So like one of the scripts was compare the market, and it's pure English. There's no CSS selector or anything. I think the only place I had to use a selector was here for one of the elements. Everything else was click this to right of that, click that, select this. It is pretty straightforward. In one of these scripts, I've used a plugin, um, and then I run this plugin. So I've mentioned that in my GitHub page on how to use Taiko plugins with your Taiko script, sorry, a JavaScript file. Um, I have so by default, whenever someone tries to learn any automation tool, they'll go to the Internet Heroku app and try to perform different actions using the tool and see if they are able to interact with different web elements. So I've tried that as well, like upload a file, handle JavaScript alerts, jQueries, pop-ups, images, sliders, open and close a tab, shifting images, highlight elements. So you can do all that. And currently, I'm looking for work, so I created a script to upload a CV into JobServe. So here is a script, and I used some environment variables. So this is another Node.js library, and I have defined the username, password, and my CV. So I can just use that, and what it does is it goes to JobServe, logs in, and uploads my CV. So uh, redirect. So as I mentioned, you can redirect. So you create the intercept before. So suppose you want to go to google.com, but you redirect the user from Google to Bing. So you can do that. And when the user types google.com, they actually go to bing.com. And you can use screencasting features. So you can actually take screenshots, but also take a GIF. And as I mentioned, I have created the whole script, uh, but just changing the front end. The back end remains the same. So yeah, so a lot of scripts, array elements. So I was trying to interact with array elements. You can actually use the console commands which you use in Google Console for your using evaluate API. I've not highlighted it here, but yes, you can store it in a variable, all the values, and then interact with it in your script. I've used another library. It's a Google Lighthouse report for one of the browsers, sorry, one of the web pages. And as you can see, that you can call the particular library in your script before it starts executing, and then you can use it. Let's go to Docker. So it's still adding. So it's a bit slow. Apologies for that. But meanwhile, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Any questions?
There's always a new version of Docker out, isn't there? Whenever you launch Docker.
Sorry?
There's always a new version of Docker, isn't there? When you launch Docker, it goes, oh, there's a new version.
Yeah. On
It's just
Windows
a
it
constant
does.
thing.
On Windows it does, but on Linux it doesn't. And I didn't
All
want to
right.
open a virtual machine to. So yeah. So you're building a Docker. It is recommended to check. Okay. Security warning. Done. Okay. So let's say Docker run -it. Let me clear everything first. Docker run -it Taiko 1, and then I'll say bash. Perfect. So I'm inside the container, and I have copied all the scripts from my OneDrive inside the container. And if you look at the permissions, we can see all our users with uh, user test, group test. So they are not on root. And then if I exit, so I've exited the container, And now if I say want to run a particular script inside the container, so before we do that, let's say what scripts do I have. So I have all these scripts. This is headless, so bear in mind if you have to run a script inside a Docker container, it has to run in headless mode, so that it's easy. So I will try to run this particular script, but if I um, don't issue any command, let's see what it does. So by default it's executing this script, Google search headless, because that's what I defined in the Docker file. So if you can see the Docker file, so I mentioned Taiko Google search headless. So if I just run the container, it will run that script. But if I want to run some other script, so I will give the command, so say Taiko, and then I will say run this particular script. So if I say Taiko pt headless, so if I say this, it will run that particular script inside the container. Oh, it doesn't. Okay, there is some error. Okay, because it should be this. Yeah, so this was PowerShell. I have to pass it to the container, so I had to use this command. So anyways, so as you can see, I can execute any now script inside a container using Taiko, and I'm not running it in root, which is good. So it's done all that. It's clicked this. It's find a text. Might throw some error, but let's see. See broadband deals. I think I type some. Okay, element with text, add and continue not found. Perfect. It's fine. Uh, Not a problem. But I think the script worked, the container works. So just wanted to highlight that. So yeah, I will stop sharing for now. Any questions from anyone in the group?
Oh, guys, shout up. I found that really, really interesting.
Yeah, so if there are no questions, I mean, what I can do is let me share my screen again, sorry. And I will, just for the benefit of everyone. So if you go to my GitHub page and click on Taiko scripts, all the scripts that I've shown, including the Docker file, are there. So you can play with it. And plus, I've also given instructions on how to use, what to use. And then I've also given how to set the environment variable, how to run the Taiko with a particular plugin, and also how to do container execution, so that will help others. Plus, if you want to go to the Taiko GitHub page, so that's here, and yeah, so they have the video here and everything is mentioned, and we have issues. So I actually raised a couple of issues, and they have been identified as bug, which is great. So it means that yeah, the community is actively looking to improve this tool, and they're listening to users. So anyone can actually go log in a bug or an issue or anything. They also have this particular um, website. So suppose you have issues of how to use the tool, you raise it here. If you find an issue with the tool itself, then you raise it in GitHub. So here you have the community, and as you can see, a lot of people are asking and responding to the queries, and this is the core team from Taiko. And yeah, so, and then the docs.taiko. So this is actually pretty interesting and useful, because everything that I learned about Taiko was from here. So all the commands are listed with examples. So suppose I want to say click, All the commands are listed on how to use it, and what options you can select. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and you can then think about what you want to use, and see if there is a command, and I'm pretty sure there is already a command for it. So there are browser actions, page actions, selectors. You can actually use dollar selector and use your standard CSS selector or XPath selectors. So those options are still available to the user. It's not like Taiko has completely got rid of it. So it's made it very flexible. So if you want to use, you can use that. If you don't want, don't use it. And then what else? So yeah, and then you can set some configs, wait for REPL modes and other things. So yeah, it's that's all I wanted to share. So that's it, guys, from me. If there are no other questions,
I'm sure we've got some questions here. I'll ask a question first.
okay.
So one of the biggest problems I have whenever trying in the automation is navigating through iframes. So how does Taiko cope with different iframes? Say you got like an action, click on something, and an iframe pops over the top. Can it cope with that?
Yes, it can. I actually ran it. So let's go to the Internet Heroku app, and there is an iframe somewhere. I think this is the iframe. Click through jQuery UI menu. Yeah. So let's go to this URL. Okay.
Yeah, the bane of my life in most of the programs.
Sorry, not that one. Shadow DOM. Maybe this one. I can't remember. Sorry. Wait. Let's go back.
Yeah, while Amit is looking for that,
Yeah.
so it works with iframe.
Yes, by
That's a
default.
short answer. And the Taiko doesn't care how the structure of your page is. So it doesn't care there's an iframe behind the page, and you can use the API as is as you view the page.
Cool.
So yeah, so we've got the iframe here. So let's inspect this particular element just to confirm. So yeah, it's an iframe containing this. So where does it actually say in the body? There has to be. So this is the iframe. Yeah. Yeah. So suppose I want to type a content here, or say click this button. So I just go to terminal. So clear Taiko, show it in real time, that's easier. So open browser, okay, and then go to, okay, sorry, you can't paste like that. Forgot on terminal it's a bit different. So let's say this is all an iframe containing this editor, and I want to click on file. So it clicked on file.
Wow.
Or click on new document. So D small, clicked on new document. Okay, so write iframe, it identified, it wrote. So yeah, I don't have to define anything, it just works. Of course, if there is an image inside an iframe and it has an alt, you can identify the image with the alt and you can click it. So you can interact with that. Text elements are easy. Image elements, if it has an alt, you can interact with it and click it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. So essentially what you're doing here is getting rid of any need to use the page object model. You just write your tests.
Exactly.
You don't have to write any functions or anything like that. You just to do what you
Nothing.
want to do on each test.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's the whole idea, because Uh,
Mm.
Testers can focus on testing rather than creating a frame. I mean, of course, it's good to have a framework, and as I mentioned, what would
Hmm.
a framework with Taiko look like? So it all depends on the organization, but you can start automating something very quickly. Uh, and it makes your life very easy, and you don't have to worry about starting framework, so you can actually write end-to-end test pretty quickly. I mean, as soon as you download and install the tool, you can actually navigate to a page, start writing your scripts, and it does the coding for you. So dot code, and it gives you the code as well.
Can not try catch as well, which is good practice. So
So
does it? Can you use the API to for up to 2 lines? So if you wanted to do some visual testing, is that something that could be done?
it can be done. So npm js. So there is actually a plugin. So let's type Taiko. Ah,
Hmm.
cookie Taiko. So there is one Taiko apply tool, not screen check. Which one was it?
The screen check a
Screen check.
plugin does, yeah,
Okay.
it does visual regression testing where internally it can, but it should be very easy to plug it in with the apply tools also because I mean it's very easy to write Tyco plugins and send information to apply tool.
Mm.
Yeah. So it can do. So there are plugins already written. I think there was another one I can't remember. Taiko Eyes or something. Yeah, Taiko Eyes. Apply Tools Eyes SDK for Taiko JS. So yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So there is
So since
already a library. So I think the good thing about having it on a Node JS framework is that because of the npm library, you have access to so many other plugins.
mm,
So yeah,
yes, I mean, as I've used, I've had a little play with Cypress and with Nightwatch. Well, they're both Node.js,
yeah,
so seems to be the platform of choice, isn't it? The
it is.
cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone else, or is it just me going to be me talking?
I've got one.
Go on, Ben.
I'm just wondering. You mentioned obviously it only works with kind of Node.js and JavaScript. Is that just because I don't know? I guess maybe ThoughtWorks felt that JavaScript was maybe underserved in terms of the options that people had to test it, or is it more because they, like you said before, trying to kind of cut out the need for things like page object model and I guess complicating things with introducing more languages to just test on a web page
Mm.
where it's going to mostly be JavaScript anyway.
I'll,
I think you're just
I'll
writing pseudocode, really, aren't you? You're not even writing JavaScript. You're writing pseudocode.
Right.
so I'll leave this to Zabil.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So that's a very heavy question, and
Yes.
and so there's a lot of decision-making process behind why we chose JavaScript. One is when Taiko, we came up with Taiko when we were doing our research for Gauge, and Gauge is this kind of runner, and people were using other testing tools with Gauge. And what we figured out were testers were struggling with using an object-oriented programming language because something like Java put this overhead of designing your classes and objects and managing state, etc., uh, and took the focus away from testing. So, and then there's this, you need to compile it, make a jar out of it, write a test, integrate it with some kind of a build system like Maven or Gradle, use it with JUnit. So, uh, so that's one main reason why we wanted to choose a scripting language which didn't have all those overhead. Um, and uh, and another reason is uh, Chromium DevTools protocol that Chrome comes bundled with works very well with JavaScript, and uh, and and a lot of users the ecosystem for JavaScript front-end frameworks were kind of there. So they already have a setup for building and deploying front-end frameworks. So the tests, uh, could be easily plugged into them while using JavaScript, because generally the test runs in that build cycle of the deployment phase of deploying the UI, etc. So that's kind of why we chose JavaScript.
Nice, thank you. I was going to say as well, I think ThoughtWorks probably should get hold of you because that was a very comprehensive, and I'm not a techie myself, hence maybe that might have been obvious with the question, but it was very kind of easy to follow that. So really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers. Any other questions, guys?
Hey,
Oh,
I had a question.
Yeah.
So it's a great tool, first of all. And if we were to integrate this with the CI/CD platform, what sort of reporting functionality does it have within it?
So interesting question. So let me share my screen again.
I
I
was
think
going to ask a similar one actually. If no one else had, I love a bit of reporting.
yeah. So the tool itself doesn't have reporting, but when it combined with the test runner, it has reporting. So let me just show you here. So if you use Gauge with Taiko, you get the reporting by default. So let's go to Gauge. Gauge ThoughtWorks. I can't remember the website, so let's do a quick Google search. So ThoughtWorks actually built this first, and then Taiko came. So let's start with the documentation or get started. And here we have view reports. So normally you have your spec file in a Cucumber world where you have your spec file, and then each line in the spec translates to a code. And here what that means is the spec file could be in Gauge, it could be in Cucumber, or whatever. I just correct me if I'm wrong, Zabil. So you can have the spec file, and then you can have the code, and the spec file will generate the report for you. So in this case, the test runner is Gauge, and you can have a beautiful script, a report like this for your test runs. I actually haven't showed it, but let me just show it to you. File, open folder.
Yeah, adding on to just what Amit said, if you look at Selenium also, how we built it is it's a library for doing the automation, and it integrates with other runners, and those are the ones that give you test reports. Many people use it with JUnit, and the JUnit has an XML file which can be displayed as your report. And that's the same thing with Taiko also. It can plug into any of the test runners
Yeah.
uh, that can generate the report. And we want it that way. We wanted to build it so that there's no vendor lock-in. Every part of it is interchangeable, and you can integrate it well with other tools, which are better for doing that job.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to show you Gauge, I mean, I need to do another talk maybe on Gauge itself, because it's
Yes.
pretty nice, because if you look at the syntax, it's markdown, and that's your spec file. So you say this is the scenario, go to this, select that, enter this, write that, and you have table. If you want to use variables, say how to use first name, last name, and this, and I define that, and then there will be uh, s- uh, code behind, and that will basically say that for this step this is the code, and this code could be anything. It could be Taiko code, it could be Python, or whatever. But in this case we are using say Taiko, and you can write your code for the backend, and then the spec or the test runner will generate the report for you. So yeah.
Okay, one question for the split between the different parts. The Taiko part is only the web driver and the verification of the result of the action, but there are no separate checks of any kind of assertions available.
Oh, assertions are available. Let me just quickly show you. I think I forgot to mention assertions. So you can use the assert function, and you can assert for text and other things. So if you go through the script, so the one we demonstrated now, so I am using assert here. I'm declaring assert library in the beginning, and then I can insert for them text. So yes, you can use that because
Okay.
it's part of Node.js. So yeah, you can use any assertion library.
But it's more implementation related assertion and not behavior related assertions like from ThoughtWorks BDD framework.
Zabil, I would hand it over to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those assertions can be driven by gauge. Um,
Mm,
yeah. But the actual assertion needs to be done in the framework, like what Amit has done over here um,
mm,
with OK and all. Um, yeah. So plus the APIs themselves. Uh, so there are two kinds of assertions over here. One is implicit assertions and one is explicit
mm,
assertions. So the API itself does implicit assertions in the sense that if an element is missing or it cannot click a button, it fails. Uh, the explicit assertions are if you want to see whether a text is uh, appears uh, after you click on something or whether the content of the text is
mm,
there or not. So there's support for both, and it has APIs that will allow you to write more of these explicit assertions. Um, yeah, and
So
assert the behavior.
So one of the most common assertions is the chai assertion library. I mean that I'm familiar with. Sorry,
mm.
and it has a lot of assertions defined. And I'm guessing you can use these assertions assertion library with Taiko as well. So yeah.
And
Yeah,
the demo you have shown is mostly an explorative usage and recording of the exploration you have done as test scripts.
Yes.
How it is if you want to come up with a test first approach and the implementation is still missing.
So I think what you're talking about is test driven development, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so as I mentioned in the beginning, this is more for end-to-end test rather than for
mm,
test-driven development. So you can still, if you're expecting something to be there, you can actually write the test and then run it, and it will fail. Say you're
mm,
expecting a button, okay, the button title is okay, and
mm,
if the button is there but the functionality behind it is not working, it can still click the button, but of course nothing will happen after it.
mm,
So I mean, you can design your test that way, but it's Taiko as a tool has been designed for a more end-to-end test perspective.
mm,
Now, I can give an end-to-end scenario. Say you have a website where it's a shopping website, and you have to always keep verifying whether the shopping cart scenario is working or not. So if you write an
mm,
end-to-end scenario like that, say go to the website, find a product, add the product to a shopping cart, go to your cart, check out, give the credit card details, and then pay for it, and yeah, confirm your order. So that's a particular end-to-end scenario, and those scenarios
mm,
Taiko can handle really well.
mm. But I can think you can even do an incremental approach if you are pair with a developer and
Yes.
you specify test by test and after each test you will put in the implementation and I think it should work.
It should work, but of course, I mean, this is what I have tried, and
Yeah.
I have no background in automation. So to begin
Mm,
with, I have a lot of experience in testing, but I never had any experience with
mm,
automation. So I picked up this tool because it was easy to use,
mm,
and then I built up all these scripts, and then I learned as I went. So
mm,
far I have not come to such kind of problems, but yes, I think
mm,
you can play with it because in the end, it's JavaScript, and if you can do something with JavaScript, you should be able to do with this
mm.
library as well.
I mean,
Thanks.
I've been very impressed with the fact that
Mm,
you can write your test in the language that you've just shown. The developers can change the look of the page entirely. It's turned upside down, put it make it pink, anything, and it would just still work. You change all the CSS selectors, wouldn't matter. It would still find the items on the page.
Exactly.
That is,
yeah,
So that's the whole idea. Let me
yeah.
actually show you.
mm,
That's the whole reason why we created the framework. Because
yeah,
again, in our research, we figured out most of the tests were failing because developers were constantly changing the application,
yeah,
and then testers had to do this catch-up game because the selectors were changing and they were flaky. And the functionality was not changing exactly. It was only the structure of the page changing.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we kind of abstracted that into the smart selectors.
So
Is there a description available of your smart selector strategy you have implemented?
Sorry?
yeah, it's
Is there a description available of the smart selector
Yes,
strategy
it's
which you
there
have
on our
implemented?
documentation. Yeah, it's there in a documentation page. We talk about how we use smart
Okay.
selectors. Yeah.
so let me actually compare two scripts. So this is Taiko for Google search, and this is Puppeteer. Not sure if you can see, but here you define so you have defined the browser and put it in a variable, and then you go to a particular page, then you have an element handle, and then you have this XPath CSS selector, and then you type something, and this. So as you can see, it is not very intuitive. I mean, it's a bit of programming. So a tester coming in to automate something as simple as Google search, it would take a bit of time to understand what actually the script is trying to do. On the other hand, if you look at Taiko, what we are trying to do is open browser, go here, write this, click that, take a screenshot. So we have done the same thing more or less, opening a browser, go to a URL, type something inside a text box, but Taiko does it more intelligently. And that's why, I mean, Puppeteer uh, gave the inspiration to Taiko. Puppeteer has also given the inspiration to Playwright. Playwright is also doing something on the same line as Puppeteer, but again, the script is not that readable for a tester. Anything else, guys?
You use the Edge browser, and
Yes.
where is the default browser defined?
The default browser, it will be defined when, so I didn't show you. So let's try to install Taiko. So when you actually install Taiko, by default, it will install Chromium.
Mhm.
So let's see. So yeah, it's downloading Taiko, and now it's downloading Chromium. So by default, it will download the thing. You can actually
Okay.
skip the download for Chromium. So
Mhm.
you can skip the Chromium download, and then in your Windows, so if you go to your environment variables and
So it uses the system browser setting.
yeah, no, so you have to define an
Okay.
environment variable Taiko
Okay.
browser path, and then
Okay.
you give the name of the Chromium browser you want to use. In
Okay.
this case, I've defined Edge, but you can define Opera, Chrome,
Mm.
or any other
Okay.
browser. So yeah.
Okay. But this environment variable from the system settings is used as default if you use open browser without any further parameterization.
Yeah. So by default, it will always
Uh,
use Chromium.
okay.
Yeah.
If there's nothing other defined in the system variables. Okay.
Yeah. Anything else, guys?
Well, that's absolutely incredible. So thank you, Amit, for doing the presentation. That's really opened my eyes to potential there. It's the sort of application I could just give to any of my testers. I might need to show them how to install Node, but once I get Node installed, which is dead easy, you just off you go, don't you? Just
Exactly.
npm install -g Taiko,
Yeah.
and just bash on.
Bash on, exactly. And
Yeah,
because it can run in a container, so you can do microservice testing or whatever you want to do,
yeah.
testing in whatever environment. So yeah, it's CI/CD ready.
Mm.
Yeah, well, so it's really good for simple end-to-end tests.
Yes.
I'd love to try and integrate that into some sort of larger automation strategy, but I've tried WebDriver.io, and you always end up with selector issues, don't you? It always seems to be a when you're running those more mature automation tools, there's always issues with iframes. I find I can't stand them. So if a tool like this, which uses a bit of clever programming in the background to make life easier for us, I'm all on board. So I'll share that with my team and we'll see what we can do. That's very, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot.
So thank you.
Again.
So thank you, Amit. Thank you, Zabil. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. Very much appreciated you coming to Knots Test tonight. Our next meetup, which I should have a calendar up to me so I can tell what the date is. It is the first Wednesday in September, which is Panicking Square. 2nd of September. We have Simon Tomes, who is going to do an exploratory testing session with us. So we bring your laptops, sit at home on your sofa, and we'll do some exploratory testing.